So I don't know what this special talk thing is about. So I think I'm the only one on the page who doesn't have a talk description, right? Because people kept asking me, what's your talk about? So I sent in my abstract and my talk title and a beautiful picture of myself, of course beautiful, and my bio to Gautam, but actually they didn't upload it. So my talk is called like this, and it's about Rails and object orientation. So just in case you're not interested in the Rails, you can go to room 1. Not, because there is no room 1. So I was at this 5K run this morning. I'm still waiting for my shirt. So who was there, actually? Because I was running. I was focusing on running. Awesome, guys. So what happened was I told this hotel guy to wake me up at 6. This guy showed up at 6. He opened my door. He came in. And so he yelled my name, Nika, wake up. And so I didn't wake up. So what he did was he took this picture and left the room. So that's my 5K run. All right, I want you guys to take a look at this picture. This picture has been taken 2 days ago when I came from Mumbai to Pune by train. I took the train. It's insanely cheap, 350 bucks, and it was a lot of fun. So I met. It was supposed to be 7 hours. It took me 37 hours to come to Pune, but I met so many people. I had so much fun. I had great talks. I mean, I didn't understand what they were saying because it was loud and they didn't understand me, so we sang a lot of English songs and stuff like that. And what is that? A lot of hugs, of course. I had a brilliant air condition. There was this breeze of the Indian mountains in my beautiful hair. And by the way, where's my water? And after, I don't know, like so we had like 34 official stops on the trip from Mumbai to Pune, and 78 unofficial stops. And also there was an incident. I have to drink. There was an incident. So we were like singing one of the famous Indian songs, and suddenly there was a big bang. So because we ran into a cow, which was on the track. So this guy here in the front, he broke his leg, and he was like starting to yell and cry, and it was terrible. So I had this warning in my ear for hours, and actually so the guys called the service team to repair the train because one of the engines got killed by the impact on the cow. It was a really big cow, and so what happened was. It took like 4 hours because the guys took another train from Mumbai. That's where the service station is to the accident. So it took like 4 hours until the service team arrived, and then it took another, I don't know, let's say 6 hours until the problem was fixed. The engine was replaced because these guys couldn't get to the problem source because there were so many people surrounding the train, and they were like trying to get through them and find the problem. And then this was the wrong engine, and they were going to the next wagon and stuff like that. So whatever. After virtually 10 hours, we went on, and I fell asleep. And so I was standing there and fell asleep, holding my hand on this bar, because otherwise you fall down. And I had a dream about an ActiveRecord bass class. I mean, not like this, not like this. An ActiveRecord bass class like this. This is not funny. This is what I see every day when I work in Rails projects. And so when I asked the people on the train, hey, what's I mean, isn't that inefficient to have so many people on the train, and it's overloaded, and now we have this problem, and we can't get to Pune because the service guys can't fix the problem. They were all like, hey, relax. It's okay. I mean, it's working, and it was working. I mean, I came from Mumbai to Pune in 37 hours. And this is the same. So I dreamed about this class, and I dreamed about like so many methods and stuff in this class and dependencies and stuff that happens. And So I hear the same, like, it works, it works, it works. Don't touch this class, it works. If you touch it, things might happen you don't want. So I woke up and I knew this train and this class are going to be my analogy for this talk. And here's an example of what I actually mean, Aaron. So we have those, so usually we have our business logic in an ActiveRecord base class, and we use a lot of features of this class, and we, hey Jim, how are you? You have to hug people you don't know. This is like the new requirement for a Sunday afternoon in India. Okay, so we use this callback. Here we go. So in this class, I do a lot of stuff, and I also use one of the famous ActiveRecord callbacks. I do an after save hook. So every time this record is saved, I send out an SMS notification to that user, because it's a user class. And I use this save method. So when I call the save method in my controller, I send out an SMS notification to the user, hey, you have been saved. And this is exactly what I want in the controller. All right? And now I do the same in a migration. So I change my database layout. I iterate over all the users. And of course, I use the save method to save my changes in the migration, because I want to reuse the API. This is what APIs are made for. And so I feel pretty clever reusing my API, because I use save in the controller and I use save in the migration. That's what an API is made for. And I actually can't wait to run the rake-db migrate. And what happens? I mean, of course, I send out SMS notifications to all my users in the database, because I triggered the save hook, although I didn't want to trigger that hook. And this is a common problem in this wasn't intended. So this is a common problem in Rails, which is an awesome framework. But there is a lot of good practices and stuff that are kind of outdated, because as soon as the Rails project gets a little bit more complex, we need some more advices how to structure our code. But right now, there is no such advice in Rails. So usually, we end up with huge controllers. Check the elephant in the right corner. Huge models. And fat views. So I'm not giving this talk to bash Rails and be like, hey, this is bad and this is shit and I don't like callbacks and I hate the ActiveRecord. I actually love ActiveRecord because it's written by Aaron Pedersen. Right now there's two possibilities. You can either go the, let's say, aggressive way and you say like, screw Rails, I'm going to use Sinatra. Or you can go the way I do. So I got a tattoo because I'm still sticking with Rails. I've been sticking with Rails since 1.2.3. And I got this tattoo. It's a heart with a banderole saying DHH. Actually, I find Aaron Pedersen more sympathetic, so I changed the tattoo. It's now a heart with a banderole and a picture of his face when he was 14, surrounded by a black rectangle. Do you want to see it? All right, so let's go back to the train. And let's assume this train is my ActiveRecord base class I was just messing around with. Every person on this train is like a feature, like something I want to use. By the way, can you see me? I'm sitting right in the back, so we're here. If you download the talk, enlarge the picture, I'm there. So what about if we change our problem? So our solution, we want to get from point A, Mumbai, to Pune. So what about if we change it to this approach? So there's like a little bit more work involved for each person, but actually this is more decoupled. Everyone can go the way he or her wants. We can take shortcuts. There's less technology involved since a bike is way less stuff than a train. And it's eco-friendly, it's good for your health, it makes you beautiful. So what I basically want to do is I want to find a way to deal with the complexity I've introduced into my big ActiveRecord base class. There's a beautiful, beautiful quote I I don't even know if it's correct English. So it's like, if you, to tackle with growing complexity, you have to reduce it. It was said by a wise man. So actually, my former boss, who's not Steve Klapnik, unfortunately, but maybe soon. My former boss used to say that, and he quoted someone else, so maybe it was Martin Fowler. So the thing is, to reduce my complexity in my Rails projects, I would like to introduce some object-oriented patterns and approaches to solve problems we all have. But I reduced the complexity by reducing my class, like one class, the amount of code in one class, to have several more classes. Like I would say, split your class from one big into 10 small classes. The problem, so that usually ends up in like having this big ActiveRecord user into, I don't know, 500 small classes. Of course, people in Rails are not really receptive to this kind of solution. This is a sickness I call fear of the class, because I was suffering from that myself, because I wasn't really aware of the fact that I can solve problems easily by just introducing a new class to solve that very problem. And so it starts with, instead of having a user class, we could have a small user class, and then we can have a form to handle that user, and a class for validations, and a class for the notifications. So we can just split it up into smaller, overviewable assets. So instead of having the notifications in my ActiveRecord base class, I could call the notification in the controller itself. Like explicit, I want to save, and then I want to notify. And I want to do this exactly at this point and nowhere else in my application. So why would I put this in the database model? And hey, I like slim controllers, so let's put it in a service class. Beautiful. So let's talk a little bit about the domain and the persistence layer. So let's say my problem would be, I would be writing a chat application for cowboys. Doesn't make sense at all, I know. Anyway, two cowboys sitting at a campfire and they chatting. And all I want to code is the chat between two guys. Want some drink, Steve? Oh yes. So this is my problem. And usually I start by, when I come from the Rails way, I start thinking in database tables like chat, cowboy, response message, and has many it belongs to. And then to make it worse, I derive all that from ActiveRecord base. So this is like the approach I learn when I read the Rails way and other books, which is all right if this problem is small. But actually what I want to do is I want to instantiate two cowboys. I want to call say, pass in the method, the message, and then I want to respond by calling respond method and pass the response. So what I do is I tackle this problem by using a domain object, a poro, a plain old Ruby object, not porno, poro. So I derive my cowboy, my main domain, from OpenStruct. Do you guys know OpenStruct? It's my favorite class in Ruby. Not in Rails, in Ruby. So OpenStruct just gives me, so I can pass in arbitrary data into the constructor, and OpenStruct will give me automatic accessors like readers and setters for the parameters I pass into. So it saves me the constructor, and it saves me a lot of attr accessor calls. So to code this chat, to code the say method, I use my cowboy class, and then I use a say method that just creates a message object, that just creates a message object with the content and pushes it on a chat stack, yeah? And to code the response, like the respond method, I go back to the cowboy class and I add a respond method. And in the respond method, I create a response object because I want to model the response in a separate class. I pass in the content, I pass in the referring question, and I push this thing on the chat stack again. And I have a message object, which is again OpenStruct, and I have a response object, which is derived from the message, just because I want. And to run this, I create a chat array. I instantiate my two cowboys, Jim and Steve, who are both in the audience. And I call the say, and I call the respond. and I run the test. So I run the test on my chat object, and it prints out this beautiful story. And if it all works, I run my tests, everything is fine, and it's like a half a second test running time. So I actually solved a big problem, a chat application, with Ruby, not with ActiveRecord, not with Rails. So this is my first step when I want to solve a problem. Now you guys might be wondering, this is really fine, but we need persistence in our application, because applications usually make sense when you save stuff into the database and then reuse it. So there's a certain approaches to tackle with this, and here's one. It's called Datamapify. It works like this, and you can download it here. Next. Okay, let's check how this works. So we have the message object and the message class again. I include the Datamapify entity module. It doesn't really matter what that does. All we do is we define which fields we want to have persistent in this message class. So remember, the message class is a Ruby object, nothing else. So I just say, please make the content, the message content, persistent. And then I need I create an ActiveRecord base model, an empty ActiveRecord base model. I put it in the persistence namespace. And this is going to be my table to save my persistent data. So I added the ID, the content itself. Oh no, please don't break. That makes me nervous, the flashing. Is it my computer or is it? So I have a really minimalistic database table and a really minimalistic ActiveRecord base object, empty. And all I have to do in Datamapify is, so I grayed out all the stuff which is irrelevant. I just tell the message repository, so you, the repository class, are responsible for my message object, which is just Ruby. And I want to have the content field in my message object being filled from the persistent message database table. So it's like a mapping. And the cool thing about the repository is it gives me all the finders I have from ActiveRecord. So I call message repository.find, and it gives me back a message object, like a Ruby object, and not an ActiveRecord object. But Datamapify helps me. So when I call message.content, this is actually the content from my database table. So I still have a really clean Ruby class, and I can map this to database fields without having to mess around with ActiveRecord. I just use ActiveRecord as a beautiful, wonderfully designed, amazing architecture, beautiful code. What else? Database layer. So I use ActiveRecord as a persistence layer. Yo, can someone please take a picture of this screen with me and then tweet it to me, because this is one of my coworkers, and she's like, usually she's having like, I don't know, wearing appropriate clothes and like nails and like colored nails and stuff, and suddenly she sent me this picture, her in a rabbit costume. And I told her I'm going to use it in this talk, so please someone makes a photo. Thank you. All right, so so this was persistence, domain. I want to talk a little bit more about the view right now. So let's say my chat application is growing, and I want to have a form. So just a very simple form. I can just type in a message, hit submit, and this is it. So usually we would put the form logic into ActiveRecord again. Like we have the validations in the ActiveRecord model. We have the accepts nested attributes because we want to have a nested form, and so we put all that stuff in the ActiveRecord class. And then we have accessible or strong parameters or whatever. So a lot of configuration in my database class. This reminds me of the train again, because there's so much features in one class, and I feel overloaded. So and another approach is to have a dedicated form object for my forms, because a form is a UI thing and not a database concern. So there's a new gem called Reform. It is amazing. It was written by a beautiful developer who's not Richard, and it gives you dedicated form classes. So I derive my message form from Reform form, and then I just tell my form, I want to have the fields content, I want to have the field author, and so on in my form. And I also put my validations into this form class. So that basically means I can have multiple form classes referring to the same object. Like I can have 5 forms for one user class. Usually you end up with a lot of if and else validates in your ActiveRecord model. This is a clean way to encapsulate the form logic into a dedicated object. So I define my form, and when I instantiate the form, I just pass in the object I actually want to represent in the form, which is a message object, because it's a message form. And then, I didn't drink yesterday like alcohol, but I'm still thirsty. I don't know why. Oh, by the way, I want to go out tonight, so I want to see something of Pune. Please, people not leaving back to their home city or wherever, please hang out with me. I'm lonesome. So I can use this form object I just created with a simple form. It just works out of the box. I can use Rails helpers to render the form, everything just fine. But the cool thing is I also decouple the validation from my ActiveRecord to the form object. So I can call validate on the form instance and not on the ActiveRecord object. And I can pass in parameters, and the form will validate the object and the input and everything else. And then we have it will fill out the errors array. So you can just use the form object as you know it from ActiveRecord base models. And it also gives you a save method, so you can save the stuff externally in a dedicated method, which whatever. So if you're interested in using this, that stuff is on GitHub. It's called Reform, and we definitely need a logo. Is there any good designers here in the audience? Steve. And this is love in the Ruby community. Let's check another problem in the view. So we have the form. Now I want to see how we can create a sidebar. And my sidebar in my chat application, dealing with cowboys. Are there cowboys in India, by the way? Yes. How are they called? Cowboys. Cowboys. Wow. Where do they live? In Pune or Cowboy University? Anyway, so we have this sidebar, and the sidebar usually has like widgets that should be in several pages available. So I have the recent messages of my chat in the top, and I have a pie chart of chat participation in the lower box. So actually, Steve is talking more than Jim, which is actually not true in reality, but anyway. So usually you just render a partial, it's called sidebar, and in the sidebar you have, so this is the partial for the sidebar, and you have the recent messages, and you render the recent messages box, and then you have another box where you render the pie chart, and you use a helper. Okay? Doesn't really matter what the helper does. So I have this sidebar, render partial, whatever. Now I want to have another sidebar, which is almost identical to the first sidebar, but in the lower box, I want to display the overall happiness in my chat computed from certain constraints. I don't know, it's 81%. So I want to have 2 different sidebars, and to make it even more complex, I want to have the left sidebar with the pie chart in 3 controller actions, and the right sidebar in 2 other controller actions. So I want to have the same, almost same sidebar in 5 different contexts. And usually you deal with that by having deciders in your partial. So in my partial, I check out, is this the context for drawing the pie chart? Then draw the pie chart. If this is the context for drawing this happiness chart with 81%, draw the happiness chart. This is deciders in your view. And we all know this is evil. Richard, what are you doing?
I'm tweeting at you.
Oh, really?
Or about you.
You don't even follow me. So if we look at these 2 sidebars, we have a generic, like a common part in the top box, and we have 2 different boxes in the lower part. So there's a lot of common behavior and rendering in these 2 different sidebars. So I would love to override the lower part of this view. And I mean, if I have let's take a Ruby class. So I have a message class again, and in the toString method, I call content to upper. Actually, it should be upcase, but I think upper is from PHP or something. So I don't want to have. So I have upper, and so I format the message, and then I print out a serialization of this message. So what we get is message.toS, oh yes, in uppercase. And let's say I don't want that. I want to have the message in lowercase. So what I usually do in an object-oriented class, which we all have, is I move the format into a separate method, and then I call this format method in my toString method. This is called an extraction. So I extract the behavior I want to change to a separate method. And to actually change the behavior to make it lowercase, I create a new class. I call it lower message, derive it from message, inheritance. And then I override only the parts I want to change, which is format. So in format, I call content.lower, which should be lowercase, actually. It's, again, PHP. I did PHP in my past, and I don't regret it. So this is a common task, workflow in object-oriented environments. I extract stuff I want to change, and then I override it. So when I call message to string, it's going to be lowercase, and that's exactly what I want. And I did that by just overriding one method in a derived class. This is awesome. So in the view, I want to do the same here. I want to override stuff. And I mean, do you guys know how that works? Because we have view inheritance. Of course you don't, because nobody explains how it works. That's why I'm here. So I want to override my stuff in my view. For this, I use a view component, also known as cells. I'm not going to go into details about cells, because my friend Harun did a great talk at the last RubyConf here in India. So you guys were all there. I know it. You watched it. You learned it by heart. So I don't have to go into the details.
Why is Harun sideways?
He's always walking on the wall. He's from Australia. Almost half. So instead of calling render partial sidebar, I put this code into a so-called cell in the view component, and I call render cell sidebar. So this is what I do. So what happens behind the scenes is the following. I create a sidebar cell, a view component. It's almost like a controller. So I call it sidebar cell. I derive it from cell Rails, and it has an action. It's called show, like an action, like in a controller. And in the action, phone is ringing. In the action, I can aggregate data, like I can prepare my chat object or whatever I want, like the same as in a real controller. And then I call render. And render will actually render the view of this sidebar cell, which is not in app views, but in app cells, sidebar, show HTML.html. So there's a little bit of the file layout, the asset layout changes a little bit in cells, but it's still very close to the original controller view thing. And the cool thing about cells is you can call render cell 1,000 times in your views, and you can have small view components and reuse them everywhere across your applications. And yes. So my view of my newly created cell still looks like this. It's a partial. It has this recent messages, and we have the ugly decider for the lower box. And when I call render cell, we get this beautiful pie chart or the beautiful happiness sidebar in our view. So it's basically right now the same as we had before in a partial. But let's get rid of the decider, because I want to override this part of my view. So what I do is, here's the original show view of my view component. What I do is I extract I extract the lower box partial into a separate partial. I put it into sidebar/lower box. That's how I call the partial. Okay? I extract it. That's the same process that we had in the Ruby class. And then in my original big partial, I replace the partial I just created by calling render view lower box. That's how we render partials in view components. So I extract the lower part I want to override into a separate method /view into lower box. And in this newly created partial, I just call pie chart 4. So I just render the pie chart, nothing else. So I get rid of the decider. Now when I call render cell sidebar, I get the recent messages and always the pie chart. So let's override the lower part to get this happiness indicator. And that works with view inheritance. Do you guys know how view inheritance works? It was introduced in Rails 3.0. So basically, you have a controller. You have a view, and in the view you call render. So this is like a shortcut code. So you call render partial item. What does Rails do? It will look for views / mummy / item partial. Because it's the mummy controller, you want to render the item partial. Now, when I derive a controller from mummy controller, I call it child controller, and I render partial item. Rails does the following, which is pretty interesting, and it's stolen from the cells gem. They look for views / child / item, and if this partial is not available, they will look for views / mummy / item. So we inherit the view from the super controller, and the same works with cells because they stole the logic from cells. So what I do to override my lower box is I create a new cell, the so-called funny sidebar cell, because it's supposed to be funny. And all I do is I derive it from the sidebar cell. So we have the inheritance structure. And then I drop in a new view into app cells, funny sidebar, lower box. And this lower box just contains the happiness chart. So when I now call render cell sidebar, I get the beautiful pie chart sidebar. When I call render cell funny sidebar, I get the funny sidebar. And I have two completely different sidebars, two different rendering workflows, different classes, by just deriving the funny sidebar cell from the original cell, and then overriding one view. This is view inheritance. And I know this example is not really convincing. But if you have a lot of, let's say you have a dashboard. We had the problem, we had a dashboard with 12 different, we call them tiles. They were almost the same, but small parts in the view always changed. And we had so many deciders. They had so many deciders until I came into the company. And so what we did, we changed all those partials into cells, and we used view inheritance. In the end, we had like, I don't know, 12 more files, but I think 60 less deciders in the view. So consider view inheritance when you want to clean up your view code. That stuff is available on GitHub, the Facebook for nerds. Are you guys still with me? I know it's the last day of the conference. It's the second to last talk, and everyone is tired, including me. But I feel great. Let's check out the controllers. I always get nostalgic when I see the Super Nintendo controllers. I was a kid and I had this. So I didn't have a Nintendo, my friends had, and I could play at their house. I had a Commodore 64. By the way, who is not doing Rails development in this room? Interesting. So everyone else is involved. That's awesome. Actually, I'm a big fan of the last talk, like getting the community running. But I think it's a little bit more. So I don't give you guys a hard time for not giving 15 talks a year, because it's a little bit more difficult for. I know the problem because I'm originally German, and so I have to travel to mostly the United States because there's the most Ruby conferences, and that costs a lot of money. And also, my English is not as perfect as my German. If I could give this talk in German, I would actually be funny. And so I know this problem, and keep it coming. I mean, getting involved in open source, getting involved in the community, that goes hand in hand. So just keep it coming. It will all work out by itself. OK, controllers. This is a classical controller found in Rails, a beautiful web framework I'm still working with. And so usually a controller's job is to be a URL endpoint. So when you hit that URL, you accumulate data, you prepare data, and then you render that data into, I don't know, either JSON or HTML or whatever. So that's a controller's job, nothing else actually. And I found a very interesting gem called Objectify, which deals with the problem that your controller gets too big. So you have a lot of filters, you have a lot of accumulation of data. You have a lot of rendering code and deciders. So Objectify, I have never used it, but it goes a very interesting way. So what it does is it hooks into the Rails routing. So I tell Objectify, if I hit the messages URL, do something. And the something is the following. So Objectify consists of 3 different classes. So everything you do in one class in the controller is done in 3 classes in Objectify. So the first thing is a policy class is triggered, which finds out, is this request valid with the parameters or is it invalid? If it is valid, a service class is triggered, and that service class actually computes the stuff that the controller usually does in its action method. And in the third class, a responder class is triggered, so in the third step, and the responder class is responsible for rendering this action. So what has been one big class is actually split up into 4 different classes in Objectify. And I don't think I would use that everywhere in my application, but sometimes when the controller gets like too complex, it might make sense using the Objectify gem in your applications at GitHub bitlove/Objectify. Why is everyone leaving right now? It's my so this was Objectify. No, sorry, what? All the people leaving have to hug me later. Thanks. So, as the last thing in my talk, I want to talk a little bit about APIs. Like controllers, controllers usually are the API backend in applications. So, in my chat, I could have an API endpoint for listing all the messages. I could have an API endpoint for getting details about a message. I could have an endpoint for sending a message, so you post to this endpoint and whatever. This is like how controllers, backend controllers work. And the main thing about API is it's always about documents. I didn't see that when I started with writing APIs, but there's always a document. So either you're rendering a document to your client, to the consumer of your API, or you're parsing a document, an incoming document, when you process, I don't know, post requests or put requests from your, if we are in a REST environment, from a consumer. So the center of attention in an API, when you develop APIs, is always a document. And usually it's like a little bit more complex. So this is just an example. There's like at least 2 levels of nesting if we use JSON. So you have the content of the message and then the author, and the author is embedded into that document. Yes. People coming back, yes. What's wrong with my voice? So in Rails, there is like two different ways of dealing with that problem. So we have like SJSON to render stuff, or we have active model serializers, or JBuilder, or whatever, like all those different template engines I call it to render JSON or XML. Let's talk about JSON here. And to parse incoming data, we have the automatically created params hash, which just parses my incoming JSON document without any knowledge about my document semantics. So there's params, and it represents the incoming JSON document. And then we have like stuff like strong parameters to deal with access control. Don't get me started on strong parameters, because myself and my friends are not fans of this. But it's merged in Rails, so it must be good. And an example to when you render a nested document is like this is a JBuilder example. For rendering, JBuilder must be good as well because it's in the Rails core. It's like so I create my nested document by having a nested JBuilder setup, like content and author, and in author I render the name and whatever. And on the other hand, when I process my parse data, I have the params hash, then I access the content, and in content the author, and in author the name. So not only is this highly dangerous, because, for example, if there is no author in my incoming document, this will break because we access nil and stuff like that. But also what I think is a big problem is that the document semantics and structure, like the knowledge about my structure for rendering and parsing, is spread over the entire framework. So we have it in the rendering, and in the parsing we have access. We use like those access hashes and stuff, so we know everything about the nesting in rendering and parsing. I don't like that. So we don't like that, me and my friends and me. So we came up with a representer pattern. It's pretty easy, actually. So let's say I want to create a document like this. What I do is I just use a module. I include a representer module to give me power abilities to the following stuff. And then I define which attributes I want to have in my JSON document, which is content and created at. And to use this, I just extend my message instance with the representer, and I call toJSON. And the representer will, so the toJSON is actually from the representer. So the representer will render the JSON. It's exactly what I want. And the cool thing about representers is it also works the other way. So I instantiate a new message object or an existing. I extend it with my representer module, and then I can call from JSON, pass in the JSON document, and this will parse the attributes and set the attributes on my message instance. So it is bidirectional. It works for rendering and parsing. So I don't spread my knowledge over the entire framework, but I have it in one representer module. And if you don't like extend, people were like getting crazy. You can just take the representer module, use a class, derive it from raw decorator, and instead of message.extend, you do message representer.new, pass in the message instance, and call toJSON on the decorator. So that works, like that's the same as we just did, but with a decorator pattern, just for people who get crazy about the extend. And the cool thing about representers is in from JSON, they just use public setters to set the new parsed attributes on my instance, and they use public readers to actually create the rendered JSON. And you can have billions of things in representers. You can nest representers. So if I want to embed an author in my message document, I use this syntax. It doesn't really matter. So what happens is I use another module that is nested in my original representer. This looks like this. It's another representer module. And I get the beautiful, if I call toJSON, this makes this nested hash. So we can have nesting. You can actually map complex documents with beautiful, clean Ruby classes or Ruby modules. You can have collections. You can have XML, so you just include XML, and if you call toXML, it will create XML instead of JSON. Isn't that great? And it's all object-oriented modules, not any weird template language or automatic parsing or whatever. So the document semantics and behavior is always in your representer module. And you can easily include hypermedia in your JSON documents. I'm not going into detail about hypermedia because Steve Klapnik is in the audience and I could say something wrong. So actually, if I include the respective module, I get a new method called link, and I can define links for my documents. I can use the Rails URL helpers in that method. And if I call toJSON or from JSON, it will automatically render me links according to the HAL standard, because I used the HAL module here, whatever. This is a special media format. So representable or raw comes with a lot of included media formats. So if you want to use a media format for your representations, for your documents, you just include the module. Everything's fine. And yeah, like I said, we also have support for JSON collection, which is another media type, hypermedia type for documents. And it gives you a beautiful JSON collection, JSON. It also works with parsing and whatever. So I'm not actually want to talk about this in detail. And this stuff is on GitHub as well. Hey, yeah, is that true? Why not on RubyForge? I was on RubyForge recently. And so I talked a little bit about domain layer persistence, how you can rework all your, how you can rework certain domain problems in Poros and plain old Ruby objects, not in ActiveRecord. Then how you can have persistence with data mapify or an upcoming jam I'm planning. View inheritance, view components, reusable view widgets with cells, form objects to refactor your models, have form objects, using Objectify to have a little bit more complex controllers, and using representers to have object-oriented documents for your APIs. this was a couple of recipes: view, model, persistence, and controllers. And so what I want to say as a last word is, if you have a problem in your Rails application, and everyone has problems, and it's getting too complex because you're pushing stuff into one class, don't be scared of introducing a new class that does just a little bit of the former work, because it's easy to test, it's easy to understand, and there is nothing wrong with introducing more and more and more classes, as long as these classes are self-explanatory. So just don't fear the class. And I'm actually on Twitter, which is awesome and a waste of time. So if you follow me, we can be friends. So you can find me on Skype and Facebook and everywhere, and it's going to be perfect. And thank you. You've been an awesome audience.
Time for a few questions.
No. They are still digesting the recipes.
We're not letting you off that easily, man.
Hello.
Hey, apart from the complexity issue, do we get any other advantage of using this recipe over the traditional way of doing things? As in,
so you mean? So the question is, please correct me if
performance? Maybe do we get performance improvement by using this recipe and not the traditional thing yay?
So you're asking. So are you asking about if you should use these recipes everywhere in your Rails app instead of the traditional Rails way?
No, in the cases if I use, apart from complexity, what are the other advantages that I get?
Apart from, beside the complexity you introduce with using those recipes, what else do you get? Is that what you're asking?
Apart from reducing complexity, what else? What are the other benefits that I get?
All right. So actually, you're not only reducing complexity. So I thought you were making fun with me. I'm touchy. I'm European. So while you reduce the complexity in your original class, oh, thank you. I would enjoy if this would be a kingfisher thing. So you not only reduce the complexity, I mean, actually you add complexity, technical complexity, but you reduce the complexity of your application code. And you also have way easier testing for all those bits and pieces you introduce, because a representer can be tested in complete isolation, a view component can be tested, so you actually get encapsulation, you get well-defined interfaces between all your components, because you start having components instead of having a big stack of global variables and helpers and everything in your Rails stack. So is that cool? He's not really convinced.
So about the JSON stuff that we talked about, won't extending a module onto every message kind of slow down the thing? If you're not using the roar representable.
The decorator, you mean? Actually, you mean when you use extend on an instance and then inject the representer, that slows down. Of course, that slows down a little bit. We had a lot of benchmarks, and it not only slows down, it also, I mean, it pushes methods into an instance which shouldn't be there. Like 2JSON shouldn't be in my database model, for example. So that is exactly why we use the decorator in most cases now, which is working exactly the same, but it's not altering your objects, so they are immutual. Sorry.
Hey,
wonderful question.
Hey Nick, great talk.
Thanks.
So
I come to you.
There are a lot of objects involved here, like decorators, presenters, and everything. But where do you actually place these objects in the Rails file structure? Is it in the app folder or the lib folder?
Really good question. So the question is where to put all those new classes, like the representer, the cells, the I don't know what else, like the the Objectify stuff. So actually, all the gems I showed come with a Rails binding gem. So they all have their separate directory in app. So we have app representers, app cells, and all this stuff. And so they come out of the box with Rails support. But actually, we are planning to provide a little little gem that works on top of Rails. It's going. No, I'm not going to tell you the name. And this gives you like all that stuff automatically. And there's also going to be a real guide how to use all those patterns in your Rails app. Because the good thing about all those patterns is you don't have to use them if you don't want them. So if you don't have to use a view inheritance thing everywhere in your app, you can just use a partial. But sometimes it makes sense. Very good question. Thanks.